Have you ever wondered how protected your brand name and identity are? Well, in this episode, I'm joined by Sanjay Raphael, an experienced chartered trademark attorney with over 10 years experience and head of UK Trademarks at Pulse.law. He will explain how you can effectively protect your brand. Welcome to the Unified Brand Podcast, brought to you by Elements Brand Management, a weekly brand building and brand strategy podcast to help you unlock your brand's potential, stand out from the competition, and create impact. So today we're joined by Sanjay Raphael, an experienced chartered trademark attorney with over 10 years experience and head of the UK Trademarks at Pulse.law. Great to have you on the Unified Brand Podcast, Sanjay. It'd be good to learn more about yourself, what you do, and Pulse.law.
Thanks, Chris, and really honoured and pleased to be on the podcast with you. I see a lot of the podcasts that you do that are really, really interesting. So thank you for asking me to be a part of this. As you said, I'm Sanjay Raphael. I work for Pulse.law or Pulse Global Services Limited, who specialise in trademarks. We sort of a user-friendly firm that focuses on SMEs and getting them to protect the brands as part of their process of being, protecting their position in the world they're trading in. So, often we talk about various ways of how we can take these brands and build them up from where they are now and help them grow and expand forward. So, as you said, I've been doing this for sort of over 10 years, worked with a number of different types of businesses. So from startups right the way to motorsport industry, and I've worked with.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so why is trademarking important for new and established brands?
We're now in a world where a lot of our presence is very much digital, it's very much online, it's very much sort of just out there constantly being bombarded with ideas, concepts, brands, tools to use and that sort of thing. And what we now need is a way of protecting how one individual might express that idea. So, if you create a new way of, for example, opening a can, you might create a brand name around that because that's how you want people to associate. You may also become first to market with that brand and become quite the market leader as a result of that. So trademarks are important because it's your consumers associate the service or the goods you provide directly with that brand name usually. And having a brand name is an easy point to attract more consumers. Trademarks also have the ability to add value to the bottom line of a business. So think about when you want to look at investment, or perhaps there's an exit strategy, or even as part of a sort of a 5-year plan of a business, you might choose that actually I want to franchise this idea out, or I want to move this into other territories. A lot of these questions are going to be answered by, one of the questions that are going to be asked is what trademark protection or what branding, what intellectual property do you hold in that is investable, that makes people want to be a part of that process. And we see it quite a lot on TV programs. And, I'm thinking of the typical Dragon's Den type scenarios where people go and pitch for their ideas. And there's often a question about their IP. And there's a reason why these questions are happening, because the investors are looking at the idea. Everyone can copy the idea, but how marketable is also the brand that they can get out there. In that case, how can we protect that? And one method of doing that is to protect it by trademarks.
Interesting. So what can be trademarked? What do you recommend to be trademarked? And is there sort of standard process to go through with that?
Great question. Yeah, so trademarks, the law is recently changed. The law it changed in order to allow any form of available technology for you to be able to register those brands. So you have your traditional type of trademarks, which are your logos, word marks, sort of sign visual elements of that. But then you have your more non-traditional style of things, which may be like holograms or sounds or even smells are possible. You could potentially register a trademark. You could potentially register the shape of a product. There are some nuances about being able to do that. Potentially you can register the shape of a product to protect the way it looks. So you can do all of those things. There are ways of applying trademarks to various elements of what you're selling or the services you're providing. But what trademarks doesn't give you a monopoly for is something that is generic or in use in every day. So by way of example, if I have a business that is car wash service and I try and register car wash as a trademark, you'll never get that through because it's quite a generic form. It means that other people can use the same mark and it doesn't distinguish your entity from another entity. Whereas if your brand is very unique and it steps out of just, it stands out, then people are much more attracted to it. It's easier for consumers to find you. It's easier to protect as a trademark. It's easier to enforce as a trademark. So if you think of brands like the usual ones that always get mentioned on things like this, but we talk about Apple in relation to computers because an Apple has nothing to do with computing, or Spotify, that's completely, it's quite a unique name for music streaming services, nothing to do with that. Or even Amazon for retail services now. We all know the Amazon is a river, but also now famously a retail service provider. So the more unique your brand is, the better it is to enforce, to protect, to register.
So what mistakes do businesses make when it comes to their brand and trademarking? What are the things that they get wrong when it comes to that process or thinking about it?
There are a few things that we tend to see. There's a bit of a trend, if you like. I think the first thing that we see is misconception, I suppose, that having a registered company name is sufficient for brand protection. That's not generally the case. Your trademarks are the legal sort of gold standard, if you like, for protecting your brand. Yes, you can get a company registered. Yes, there may be ways of preventing other companies from using the same or similar brand name on company's house, but actually the gold standard way of doing it is to get a registered trademark, because a registered trademark would trump a company registered name. You can use it to enforce your rights against someone who's got a similar company name, in theory. So that's probably a really good misconception that people have, that I've got a registered company, I don't need to worry about anything else after that. The other misconception, I suppose, is that it's a very expensive and costly process, partly because there's a lot of stuff in the media about large businesses going to war with each other about one thing or another. If you think about cakes and the recent issue around chocolate cakes in the shape of a particular insect, there was a lot of stuff going on about that.
Yep.
And there were two large entities, but actually it's not that expensive. And if you get it right at the first point, right at the beginning, it makes your life so much easier further down the line. So it treats trademarks more akin to the process of starting your business, like you would say setting up a website or designing your logo. Treat as part of that process rather than, an added expense or an added issue that needs to be dealt with later on. It should form part of the package of building your business up. The other misconception that we find a lot is people think that they can register. They want to tell their clients what their business does. And what they then do is make the mistake of saying, well, we are a car wash company. And they'll think that that's sufficient. This is by way of example, that this is sufficient to be a brand. But actually it's not the case, because the next city along or the next road along, there might be another company called Car Wash. And how is your consumer going to know which car wash to go to? So if you're using generic terms to try and explain what your business does, unfortunately, I suppose, you may get lost in the noise of it and won't stand out. So as I say, look at how some of the other brands are out there that you might like, associate with, feel connected with, and look at how their brand stands out much more in a crowded market like that, because they have got very unique names. They aren't related to what they do or offer. And that's quite useful. I mean, there are ways of getting around a descriptive mark, but from a trademark perspective, that really narrows the scope of what you can do with it. So usually my advice or suggestion is that, look, it's a brand, you're going to get that out there. If you want to grow, try and make it as unique as possible.
Definitely. So with regard to that, if someone found themselves in a situation where, like you said, for example, they'd started up and they've got that name Car Wash, and what is the actual process of sort of trademarking, and also what are the pitfalls in terms of if it goes wrong? Why is it really important to trademark? Because what could happen if they don't get it right?
The first step in any of that is to make sure that at the time of choosing your name, you do some due diligence behind it. So you could do a Google search, and you could do, a search to see who else is trading with that name. But we also have what's the UK Trademark Register. So you can do a search on the UK Trademark Register to see if there are any identical or similar marks that are on the register that could be problematic. So by way of example, if I want to register cup for tennis rackets, by way of example, and someone has registered SUP, SUP, for tennis rackets or similar goods. Now, although cup is not identical to SUP, they might be deemed similar because of the lettering and the form and everything else. So whilst you can do a due diligence, do the search prior to choosing a name, it's also worthwhile doing a very comprehensive search so you can identify if there are any similar marks, but also recommend that you have, or you speak to a professional who can look at those marks on the register to make sure that you aren't selecting a name that could be potentially problematic further down the line. Often, people want to use sort of more generic names that are quite common out there, and that might prove problematic because a number of other people may have chosen to use that same type of branding. So the word Premier, for instance, might be used quite a lot and might form part of a brand, but actually Premier we all understand to mean premium or first, but that's not really unique. So trying to make it as unique as possible is crucial. The process is fairly straightforward for filing an application, actually. As long as you do the due diligence, a trademark application process can take between 4 to 6 months. And if you do it right, you can make sure that you've got the right basis for expansion of your business. So by that, I mean, don't just think about what you do now, but also think about what your brand might expand into in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's talking about future-proofing the brand and that sort of thing. So, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse and NFTs and that sort of thing. So as long as you have a genuine and bona fide intention to use that brand in relation to those goods or services, then making sure you try and protect that off right at the beginning, like the very first application stage of your brand, is going to be crucial to ensure longevity of your mark. So essentially what you don't want to do is having to keep revisiting your application because your brand has evolved and you've done something different or new, but you could have covered that off right at the beginning. It just adds a layer of cost and an extra hassle you probably don't need.
So actually touching on that there, the NFTs and metaverse side of things, I mean, initially, is that going to be sort of the Wild West, but how do you see trademarking and that sort of coexisting, and how can brands get prepared for that point of view?
Again, I think there's a lot of talk about NFTs and the metaverse, and it is just understanding what an NFT is and what the metaverse is and where you fit into that. And it's just understanding that brand protection is all about the brand itself in that space. So the NFTs and the metaverse is a very virtual world, but the fact that you have a brand being used in that virtual world is the crucial element. So if you register the right brand in that virtual world, in theory, and we still have to see the fallout of this, but having a brand in that virtual world will have, in my opinion, the same impact as if you were to have in the real world that we're in now. It shouldn't change anything, except that you are perhaps protecting yourself in that space and then being more, I suppose it goes back to when you file your trademark application, what you have to do is you tell the trademark office the brand that you're filing and the goods and services that you're going to offer. And as part of that specification of goods or services that you offer, you might want to say, well, actually, this is a sector or a field that I might flow into or work into. So I want to protect this intangible section of the world. But essentially, I think the trademarks and branding will work in a similar sort of way that, once you protect that segment of the area, and if it's a unique brand, again, being able to protect it in that environment should be as straightforward as you would normally, because an infringement is an infringement as a result of that. If someone's using your brand without your consent, you can then take action for it if you've covered that space off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's going to be a really good step for brands. I think it's going to be an interesting one. I've seen things like Louis Vuitton and people like that actually putting up metaverse stores and stuff like this, which is really quite interesting. But
absolutely.
When we spoke last time, you were talking about protectable brand names or protectable trademarks. And do you have any tips around that in terms of things to think about with regards to protecting a trademark?
So I think my biggest tip, I suppose, is really try and be as unique as possible. There's always this thing to try and be, I want to explain to my consumers what I do. But again, I would point to brands like Spotify. if you didn't know anything else about them, you would not know that Spotify does music streaming services because the brand doesn't tell you that. Same with Amazon. You didn't know anything about it, you're living under a rock, personally. But if you didn't know anything about that, you wouldn't know that they offer this online retail type offering. So the tip is to be as unique as possible, come up with unique themes. But if you can't, then, I think there are different levels of how you can protect that brand, but those levels will determine the scope and protection of how wide or narrow your protection is going to be. But I think the tip of the day, I suppose, the tip is just try and be as unique as possible, because, like I say, to get it onto a trademark register, to be enforceable, and then even if you're thinking about expanding it into other territories, it's important that you are sort of standing out away from it, out of the crowd.
Cool. Yeah, so that's interesting. So when it goes into other territories and stuff like that, I remember we talked before, you mentioned about how there used to be one classification for the whole of Europe, was it? And it's obviously split now, but is that any different if you approach different territories or different countries and stuff like that?
Yeah, it can be. So if you're expanding into normal territories that we tend to deal with, China, USA, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, that sort of thing. Those are sort of the key territories that pop up quite more often than not. But for instance, in China, there are certain considerations. So if you're filing in China, we would use the normal alphabet that we're familiar with, the Roman alphabet. But in China, obviously, you can translate that alphabet into Chinese characters. And there's also a thing called transliteration, which is a further translation of that, a transposition of the exact words into those exact characters, if you like. So there's a translation, the meaning of your brand, and then the actual exact characters that are transliterated into Chinese characters. So you've got to be aware of that actually, does the brand that you're using in that country have a separate meaning or a separate issue, or there's some concerns around it. For example, in the UK, we call the crisps Walkers, but in the US, they're known as Lays, and probably in other jurisdictions. So just understanding that sometimes the brand you choose in one territory may not work in another territory because there might be other legal requirements. In terms of the specification, again, somewhere like the USA, so here in the UK, we can use broad terms. So for example, if you were using software and you were providing a software solution, you can use the word software within your specification of your trademark. That's quite a broad term. But in the US, if you were to use that term, they would want that really specified and narrowed down as to what that software is being used for. So it's understanding what requirements are there. Also, each country will have its own examination process. So they will understand, or they will examine a trademark differently in each country that you're interested in registering. So your brand may not be acceptable in the US because there is a meaning associated with that particular brand that makes it generic or difficult to register. So again, it's all about trademarks. On the face of it is very simple. You protect a brand and that's it, really. But actually, when you delve into it, there are a lot of nuances, there are a lot of complexities that you need to sort of unravel to make sure you get it right. So it's useful to speak to someone who has experience around that, to speak to someone who's got that rounded experience about dealing with that can guide you through that process, because you try and muddle your way through that, it can be difficult. I've seen trademark applications filed where the individual's done it themselves, but they've not thought about various other bits and pieces that go around it. So what they end up coming to us with is the issues that actually, I've done this, but it's not quite right for what I need to do next, but I need help to fix how I can do what I need to do next. And just making sure you do it, like I said, doing the right at the beginning will probably save you a lot of time, effort, and money further down the line.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the different name changes like Walkers and Lays. I saw something about, I think it's a bit of an urban myth. I don't think it's actually true, but that Voxel Nova in Spanish means don't go or something like that. It means like, I think it's actually an urban myth, but it's interesting to think that if you don't think about that name and how it translates, that there can be things like that pop up.
Yeah. It is a trademark myth. We tried to use it as a way of explaining the importance of understanding your market when you go into those brands. And I'm sure, marketing agencies use very similar sorts of examples. But yeah, there was this story, I suppose it was going around, that the word Nova registered in the UK was fine, but the moment you tried to register that in Spain, no one would be interested in buying a car. That actually translates to it does not go, because Nova means it just doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, it's understanding that. I mean, also I think recently the UK government's done a trade deal with Australia. So I don't know, I'm seeing a lot more Australian-based bits on TV, for example. And I was watching something the other day and an advert for Hungry Jack's popped up. They went, oh, that looks like Burger King, and did a bit of research. And what do you know, actually, that's what it's called in Australia, Hungry Jack. Who would have known before that? So yeah, very interesting stuff when you start to delve around and outside of, the UK.
So that's quite interesting. So if like the UK and the Australian trade deal, does that mean then, obviously, if you have that trade deal in place and you want to start if they want to start trading over here, or we want to start trading over there for any particular reason, that's when there could be some issues if that trademark isn't sorted or isn't in place? Because like you said, there could be some conflicts already in place.
Absolutely. And if we're opening up the market, by no means an expert in trade deals or what that all means, but potentially if it opens up the market to businesses registering their brands in the UK and you being able to register your brand in other territories, it's important to make sure that you are first registered, because the UK works on a first to file system, which means that the sooner you file your trademark and protect your brand, the better it is for you in terms of protecting your entire business.
What do you love most about helping businesses to effectively trademark and protect their identity?
It's speaking to people. It's understanding what the businesses are. It's understanding where they've come from, their story. And sometimes they have some amazing stories of why they've decided to drop their 9 to 5 and do something completely different and distinct, and try and make a point in what they're doing. So I really love that side of the things. It's being able to give access to people who might otherwise think that this is not for them. So for the SMEs, you might think, actually, I don't want to be spending loads of money or dealing with sort of a stigma attached to dealing with lawyers, I suppose, is one way of talking about it. But we want to try and give them a different approach to that, try and hopefully help them, give them that support and that access, which they might not otherwise choose to get access, but also just to feed them information that I don't think is readily out. I think is, you think that you want to start your business and you would do all the rest of it, but some of this stuff is just not so obvious. As a business, you might not think, well, actually, do I need to worry about registering my brand? The other thing that, I forgot to mention, but I think is quite crucial, is when you ask a third party to create a brand for you or a logo or create content for your website, whatever else it is, just because you've paid the money doesn't mean that you, the person who've requested that, commissioned that work on those brands or that work, that's a copyright matter. And, you need to make sure that you transfer that copyright, you take ownership of that copyright, and that's done by a written agreement, a written assignment, almost like a transfer of a house. You've got to give that in writing to say you now own that logo, that branding, that design, so on and so forth. Because without you owning that, the person who's created all of that stuff can and may choose to provide that same type of branding to a third party. So you lose out on it. So it's important to understand that actually paying someone to create a logo doesn't necessarily mean that you own the logo. So you got to be clever. You got to, be mindful of that.
Yeah, we've got in our contract, when we do any sort of branding projects, is a part in the contract that says as soon as it's signed off, we transfer ownership to the client, and we just reserve the right to use it in our portfolio or on social media channels, stuff like that.
Right. So that's good then, because the client is then fully aware that they then become owner. They own the rights to that brand, which is helpful, because when you come to them register a trademark, what you then they want to go down this route of is, well, actually, however you register this trademark, you don't own the trademark. You don't own the brand and logo, because in theory, actually the ownership still vests with the person who's created that piece of work. So you might be registering a brand thinking you own it, but actually you don't.
Yeah, I've seen a few things as well about like licensing, that kind of thing and stuff as well, where people have done that. And exactly. I suppose really murky territory when it comes to who owns what.
Exactly. And ownership is a big part of IP, making sure you do own it all and that sort of thing. So, it's dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And all this stuff is not readily available, I think, to SMEs who are starting out. And, I get it. I think, businesses are trying to build up business, survive, do whatever else it is they need to do to keep that business going concern. So some of this stuff is probably less important or falls down the list of things to do. But, hopefully this gives them an impetus to go, actually, I need to look at this, or I need to think about this in a bit more detail, because in a world that we are in at the moment, this is the trend that we're under. And the more protection you can have to ring fence your business, the better it's going to be, I think, in terms of longevity of a business.
Yeah, one of the things I was really taken aback by when you introduced me to Pulse.law and you kind of explained what you do there, and we've known each other for a while, but you explained Pulse.law and the backing that it has. I found it a really great resource for small businesses to there's that legal background to it, and there's also the accessibility of it and the expert knowledge as well that comes behind it, which I was really sort of taken aback by. Yeah, it's a great resource for small businesses, definitely.
That's what we want. We want to be approachable. We are approachable. And it's just, we do these consultations that we can sound out what you need, how you need to do it, and then kind of set a strategy or a direction for where you need to go, and then work out the best way to do it, with legal expertise, because we understand the sector and the area, and we provide that expertise in the best possible way.
So I saw recently you shared an article about the Only Fools and Horses firm looking to sue cushy dining events. Can you explain this, and do you have any sort of other interesting cases of trademark infringement you've come across?
Well, yeah, I think that's more of a copyright case, I won't lie. It was interesting because I think there was issues around whether certain terms were created as a result of the Only Fools and Horses television program, whether it was already a pre-existing set of terms that existed in that area of London and that sort of thing, South London area, whether there was an association with, I suppose, the word and with the program itself. So there are a number of things going on in that. But it is definitely an interesting case because it's an example where, content created as a result of a television program where catchphrases or things like that created could become trademarks in their own right. And then, there are instances where that can be used. I mean, years ago, I remember, studying in Southampton, there used to be a pub called The Hobbit. And when the film Lord of the Rings came out, there was an issue around that pub being called The Hobbit. And this goes back years ago, where because of the rights of the brand and everything else, they needed to change, or they were asked to change the name of the pub, because obviously it wasn't anything to do, or they didn't want any association with the film or the franchise or anything like that. So again, that sort of thing is right. But remember, it is about, getting the right kind of protection in place. And sometimes it's speaking to someone who knows what to look for that can make the difference in trying to protect your, the branding. Other legal interesting cases, well, I think we've seen obviously the issue between Marks and Spencer's and Lidl play out even through their Christmas ads, where they talk about the caterpillar cakes and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm sure that there's always some rumblings or the other going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did a brand workshop the other day, and we were talking about, I was trying to explain how you can extend a brand in terms of the language and the way that you use certain terms into taglines, slogans, catchphrases, those sort of things, certain language you use. And the example I gave was, I remember once somebody I used to work with turned around and said, "Oh, lovely jubbly." And I just, when you said, when we talk about Only Fools and Horses, it just rung a bell with me. But yeah, lovely jubbly. And I said, "Oh, I love Fools and Horses. It's one of my favorite TV programs." And this person went, "What are you talking about? Only Fools and Horses?" So that kind of catchphrase had gone into the public kind of consciousness, but actually he had never seen Only Fools and Horses. He was a lot younger. But that's funny how that could easily, if you're not protecting something, how easily that could easily spiral out of control and then end up somewhere.
Yeah, no, and there are a couple of other things off the back of that. So obviously there are a number of household brands that we probably use and say instead of what they are. So I recently came across a pretty old video of the brand Velcro, where a choir of lawyers were singing to say, actually, this is called a hook and loop, not Velcro. So don't call everything that connects in this way Velcro, because Velcro is the brand. And, there are a number of brands, I'm sure, that we use in the day-to-day life that are actual brands, but we tend to use them in a more generic state. And that can be a problem for brands if you aren't careful in how you control it. It becomes problematic. So by way of example, Google's a good example of, we say we Google this or we Google that, but Google, I think, are very good at making sure you know that it's a brand and it's not a generic trademark. So to Google something is not the same thing as to search something. It's to use Google to search something. They're very good with making sure you're aware of that. But going back to your point about slogans, catchphrases and stuff like that, now again, there's an influx of people on social media. There's loads of social media out there and they're coming up with various dance techniques or statements or, that sort of thing, and phrases and certain crazes and trends that happen as a result of that. The flossing trend is one thing, and the dabbing and all the rest of it. That probably show my age, but but all of that, again, if you're creating that something and it becomes a trend, it might be useful to try and look at protecting that element of it, because if people start to benefit off your content in your creation, and a trademark is one way of doing it. You can always rely on a thing called copyright as well, that I've sort of spoken about earlier. But again, that sort of thing we see quite often. These guys on social media who are trending might coin a phrase that other people start using. So it's useful to try and remember that there are ways of protecting that, potentially, to make sure that you have control over how and who uses that. And then maybe you can monetize that as well in some way. So whether that's on applying that statement on T-shirts or bottles of water or that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's randomly, when I started my YouTube channel years ago when I was snowboarding, someone said to me, my hair grew out a bit, and this person was trying to rib on me a bit, and he was saying, you look like Anchorman. So I was like, oh, cheers. But because of that, I used to like that film anyway. But when I did the YouTube thing, I thought I need to stay classy San Diego at the end of the video. So every video I finish on and keep those brands unified in a very kind of Ron Burgundy type way. It's like a hook, but I never really thought about how that could take on a life of its own at some point.
Exactly that. Slogans are different. I'm not saying you're right in that. Slogans are slightly different from the trademark world. But yeah, brands unified is a statement that could work as a trademark for sure. But with those types of statements, brands, slogan type things, if you think about, if I use the example of have a break, have a Kit Kat, that's maybe not for the younger generation, I think. But back in our day, or my day, I should say, if you said have a break, everyone would turn around and say have a Kit Kat to you. And that's because of so much promotion. Now, have a break is such a non-typical, it's the most generic trademark I think you could ever have a break. Everyone says that, you should have a break. But because of the way, the marketing and all the rest of it that went behind making that a statement piece that associated with a brand, they were able to get that protected and registered because it became so part of our everyday language. Again, say with a word like Christy or lovey-dovey or whatever, those sorts of things. So it's an interesting and fascinating world, but one you should definitely look into a bit more to get right.
Cool. What would you say drives you mad about your industry? Are there any things that are kind of bugbears?
Generally speaking, not miscommunication, but generally the lack of information out there on what SMEs can and should do, I think is probably my biggest bugbear. I think that's probably the thing I talk about the most is, how crucial brand protection is as part of everyday business and how important it is to try and be as unique as possible. Because the more common words we use to try and register brands, the more that trademark register becomes full of those type of brands, and your brand no longer is unique or capable of being distinctive and able to stand out from the crowd. So the more unique you can be, so much the better.
So have you seen any companies or clients recently that you think have nailed their brand from a protectable point of view?
I was thinking about this the other day. Say Gorilla Wear, I don't know if I should name drop anybody, but there's a brand out there that does clothing for the world's strongest man type series and that sort of thing. And I think their branding is quite good in the way that they approach it. And just, it reaches out to me personally because, in that sector and that sort of thing, it talks to me. And I suppose I like that it's strong yet subtle in its message.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's been really good having you on today, and really appreciate having a chat. And it's always good to catch up.
Thanks.
Oh, no worries. Where can people find out a little bit more about yourself, Pulse.law, and anything else that you're sort of working on at the moment?
yeah, if you want to get in touch, there's always the website Pulse.law. You can always find me on LinkedIn. You can type in Sanjay Raphael on there. You'll be able to find me. You can reach me on there. And I have got sort of hopefully a few things. We're doing a few other bits and pieces, so you may see my name getting dotted about here and there. But yeah, reach me at the website. Always happy to talk. I'm sure you've guessed that by now. But yeah, we do free consultations. So if you've got a question or a query, go to the website, book an appointment, and get in touch. Basically, I'm happy to have a chat.
Definitely, I can highly recommend it as well. It's a really useful consultation, useful service, great company, and Sanjay really knows what he's doing. So it's really good to have you on. And I'll put all your links in the show notes so people can get in touch.
Oh, perfect, Chris. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And as I said at the top of the show, cheers for inviting me over.
No, it's been good. I've learned loads. It's really, I always find it really interesting, and it's a really interesting sector, definitely, and it's just so important. And I think people need to find out a bit more about it. So that's great.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time.
No worries. We've just put together a weekly brand tip video series, which is designed to help you to unlock your brand's potential and stand out from the competition. And if you're interested, if you just go to elementsbrandmanagement, all one word, .co.uk/weekly-brand-tips. Sign up and you'll be delivered a 3 to 5 minute video a week straight to your inbox. I'll put a link in the show notes if you're interested. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to receive more, you can subscribe in all the usual places. We're talking iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Please, if you get a chance, rate and review. It helps the podcast to kind of get a bit more visibility and allows us to keep on producing these podcasts. Have a great week. Catch up soon. Keep those brands unified.